Hit 'em low, hit 'em high, and watch our Eagles fly. Fly, Eagles, fly, on the road to victory. E-A-T-L-E-S, Eagles!
Oh, yeah, it's the Matt Kwazaborski Show calling you live and direct from Washington, D.C., Woodley Park area. It's a very humid, cloudy, windy day. We're anticipating the remnants of Hurricane Ian that wrecked the Florida West Coast area, especially for all the people in Fort Myers and all in Sanibel Island, where their towns and cities were just devastated there. It was projected to hit Tampa. It missed Tampa, and it also missed Gulfport, Florida, St. Pete, dodging a bullet from a friend of mine down there telling me about there. And the reason I just bring that up is I have a house down there. I inherited my mom's house when she passed away in 2014 suddenly. And, I've had the same lucky tenants there the whole time. I've been lucky to have the same tenants there the whole time is really what I should have said. But anyway, this is the Matt Kwazaborski Show, going to do little Eagles recap for the last week, and then looking forward to Sunday. I wasn't able to do it this week because I was in Boston for a conference and John was working, so our days didn't really line up this week, but hopefully we'll be back on the podcast next week, either Monday or Wednesday night. I do want to thank Al Gore for inventing the internet. I would like to thank all my loyal listeners from around the world. I get some really great downloads and some really great people tuning in and downloading, and I really do appreciate all your work and all of your attention to what I'm trying to do, all your work you do, and listening and putting up with my Eagles banter. So we're going to quickly look at what happened last week here in Washington. I want to look at the legacy of Douglas Pederson, the head coach, Super Bowl winning head coach. I want to look at some of the big-time moves the Eagles have made that kind of like put this franchise on a path towards success, especially in my generation or my lifetime, and then kind of look ahead to week 4 already in the Eagles. And with that, the Eagles are the only undefeated team in the NFL, which is quite shocking after 3 weeks. For the third week in a row, we've had the player of the week on the defensive side, or a special teams player of the week, or an offensive player of the week. And this week was Brandon Graham, the 34-year-old high motor guy out of Michigan, and one of the veteran leaders of this team and just an icon in Eagles history, had 2.5 sacks to put him on the mark. And then Jalen Hurts, the much maligned Jalen Hurts, the people who are very critical of him, wins NFC Player of the Month on the offensive side of the ball. I think he was just one for the the whole league, which was very impressive. He had 3 really impressive outings against the Lions opening day on September 11th, September 19th here in Philly on the home opener against the Vikings, and then on Sunday in Washington. And what I noticed on Sunday, the way I would look at that game was total domination. I thought they dominated the Vikings for the most part, but they really, really just shut down a Commanders team that had a lot to play for, and playing the Eagles, especially with Carson Wentz, playing the Eagles for the first time since he was traded to the Colts, now to the Commanders, and Ron Rivera. And it's a divisional game. You want to get up, you want to play in front of your home crowd, which not a lot of people from Washington go. There's a ton of Philadelphia Eagles fans there. I know about 1,500 or so that I heard were at the game. Probably more than that, busing down from Philadelphia. I know one group had at least 1,200 that went down. What I take away from that game, though, is a second dominating performance by the defense. They're at number 1, and tied with number 1, I'd say Devonta Smith was hugely impressive with his 169 yards and just making catches after, like, just some acrobatic catches, especially the one that may have defined his career. Down in the second quarter, the Eagles are driving towards the end of the half, and Jalen Hurts puts up about a 30-yard bomb, and Devonta just looks like he leaped about 10 feet in the air to snag it between 2 Washington Commanders defensive backs. And he kind of, the way he positioned himself, he did fall hard on his back, but he positioned himself so well that they could not get the ball. So I would say the defense was dominating with 9 sacks, pass defenses, tackles for losses, and really just never let Wentz get comfortable back there until the end of the game, when he started putting together a couple drives here or there, but it was definitely garbage time. And the Washington offensive line is just not good. They've lost a ton of talent on the offensive line. They were banged up, and I think this was the kind of attack I expected the Eagles to do in Week 1 against Detroit, who were also down a few defensive linemen and hurt linemen, and they weren't able to get hardly any pressure. But this time they just really, really took it to Wentz. Wentz again looking like he was taking sacks for losses, just kind of throwing the ball away, just really never got comfortable back there, and he cannot break away anymore. He no longer has that ability to just break away out of tackles. He's like lumbering back there when he's getting chased and flushed from the pocket. Back when he was at his peak with the Eagles in 2017, he could, when he would feel the pressure, he'd step up, and then he would just take off, and he was able to do that. But since the knee injury, it's really, really took away his speed and his ability to break away from tackles. And you see that now, and that kind of makes him, I don't want to say one-dimensional. He's not Joe Flacco back there, but he can definitely still motor, but he's turned more into like a Matt Stafford type back there, where he's not going to kill you with his legs. It has a strong arm, just not as effective as Matt Stafford. So that's the other thing I took away. And I think, Devonta Smith, the defense. Number 2, I go Jalen Hurts, and for the number 3, I don't even know if there is a number 3. Jalen Hurts played a phenomenal game. The Commanders came out and they were fired up, especially defensive backs. They had a few nice pass deflections and pass breakups from Jalen that, it's like, okay, this is going to be a back and forth game, and it was for a little while. We actually punted the ball 7 times. But the definitive play of the game, I guess the third can go to the coaching staff. John Gannon, Sirianni, Shane Steichen, and the score was 24-8. It was one of those games where they didn't score in the second quarter again, but they really didn't need to, and it just showed you how dominating they were. And they will have to score in the second half this week to win against Jacksonville, and we'll get into them a little bit. But just to wrap up, I mean, there was, outside of maybe the running game really not getting off track, or on track, I should say, it was a dominating performance all around. I mean, that's the only thing that I would say to this, the little bit of criticism. I do want to talk about Ron Rivera for a second. And we saw two really, at least in my mind, two really bad coaching decisions. Ron Rivera and then Dan Campbell in Detroit. But Ron Rivera challenged, Devonta Smith caught a 45-yard strike, like a deep ball from Jalen down the right sideline, like right in front of the Washington sideline. And Devonta torted his body in a way, kind of like over his right shoulder, catch bent around backwards. And when he landed, it was questionable if he got 2 feet in the ground. The refs gave it to him. The Philadelphia Eagles offense ran all the way up to the line to get the next play off, because if they get the next play off, you can't review the former play. And Rivera just hesitated, and then you see the replay of when Rivera throws the challenge flag. It was clearly after the Eagles had snapped the ball in the next play. And to me, that could have been a pivotal moment in the game. The reason I say this, up until then, both offenses were struggling. They couldn't move the ball. It was like a heavyweight fight, just kind of feeling each other out, little jabs here, jabs there, mostly in defensive position. And then the Eagles threw, like a shot to the ribs, or, maybe even an uppercut. And they landed it, even though technically I don't think they really did. And Rivera's got to be smarter than that. I don't know how it runs if he has someone up in the booth that's telling him, you have to throw the challenge flag on that. They had to get the angle in faster to see that. Because, again, the Eagles had to run up 45 yards to the line of scrimmage. You're going to tell me that the Washington coaching staff couldn't determine whether or not to throw the challenge flag? Because I think if they throw the challenge flag, Washington wins the challenge, and who knows the way the pace of the game going. Because I say right up until that point, Jalen, they weren't moving the ball very well, and Washington was under duress. Wentz was under duress all the entire time. So that was a pivotal thing. And the other one I wanted to bring up was Dan Campbell, the Detroit Lions coach everyone wants to love and wants to play for. They're up in Minnesota winning 24-21. They have 4th and 4 from about the Minnesota 39-yard line. They were 4 for 5 or 3 for 4 on 4th downs during that game. But he decided to try a 56-yard field goal. I understand it's inside the dome. It's ideal weather. You have a kicker with a leg. But the rule in the NFL has changed over the years to where if you try a field goal attempt and miss, the opposing team gets the ball where the kick was attempted, not the original line of scrimmage. A field goal kicker lines up about 7 yards behind the line of scrimmage. So 39-yard. That the ball's at the 39-yard line. You got 10 yards in the end zone to get it through the uprights, plus 7. That's 17 yards that's on the kicker has to make from the 39. But even still, the score was 24-21. He kicks the field goal and he makes it. It's 27-21. Minnesota still has a shot to win the game, and you're putting the ball right back in Minnesota hands. Detroit was moving the ball. They were playing the reckless, not reckless. They were playing with, all of the energy in the world like they have shown in the first 2 weeks, 3 weeks of the game. They should have been able to just get that fourth down. And if they don't convert it, Minnesota has, they have to go 7 extra yards, and they did to score and win the game there. So I thought that was a horrible coaching job by Dan Campbell. I thought Ron Rivera messed up a little bit with the challenge flag. And those are two, it's Dan Campbell's second year, but he's coached around in the league before. He's been a temporary head coach down in Miami for a little while. And they fired Adam Gase, I believe. And then now with Detroit, Ron Rivera's been around forever on the coaching sidelines, longtime coach of the Carolina Panthers. But I was just surprised about that. And I also saw in the Eagles game the week before, the Minnesota coach, Kevin O'Connell, going into the end of the second quarter. I think the Eagles had the ball with 2 minutes to go, very deep in their own zone, like I'm saying, like around the 5 or not the 5, maybe the 8 or 10 yard line, and they have to drive. They have to go and drive, and you think they try to just run the ball out. First play of that series, Jalen Hurts kind of runs around, scrambles, then realizes, let's slide down, keep the clock going. And I thought the Minnesota coach should have called a timeout and used them up there. Maybe he realized they may have run out of time, but you just never know. You got to coach to win, and I felt like those 3 coaches on those particular instances were not really coaching to win. I don't blame the Minnesota coach that much. It's only his second game as an NFL head coach, which is way different than being an assistant head coach, and also way different than being a college coach. So just to wrap up a little bit around the coaching decision, I thought Ron Rivera had a missed opportunity there to challenge the Devonta Smith 45-yard catch on the sideline, because once that opened, that just opened the floodgates. The Eagles go into halftime 24-0. I think Carson Wentz was like 2 for 11 for a negative 1 yard, because when you get his passing yards and his sacks, they do take away from the passing yards a little bit. And it was just, I don't know, like I just looked at that game and was just pleasantly shocked and a little scary of how well the Eagles played during the first half of that game. Like, I mean, it was just incredible. Like, outside, like I said, feeling the offense around a little bit from time to time in the beginning, but they just took it to Washington defensively, offensively, special teams. And I guess special teams could be another area in the return game. Like, Brett Covey kind of looked a little bit unsure on one of the first punt returns. And then he got rocked 2 other times. I was like, whoa, there were huge hits, and you knew they were coming, but something has to be done a little bit to protect him when he's catching the ball back there. At least give him a shot to run. I mean, someone's got to get down there and try to create those lanes for him. But he did get rocked. So hats off to the Washington special team guys made those plays, but it was just a dominating performance. Washington's not as bad as we saw, but are the Eagles as good as we've seen in the first 3 weeks? Looking at their schedule, who is really going to challenge them? I think Jacksonville will definitely bring it. They got games in Arizona, Dallas. I don't go down the schedule and be like, oh, they should go 17-0. But at this point in time, they are favored to win every single game the rest of the year, and that's kind of shocking at this point in time with that. So they are 3-0. The only undefeated team is the Miami Dolphins last night, lost to Cincinnati Bengals 27-15. I think Cincinnati starting to round into form a little bit more than they were the first 2 weeks of the season. Joe Burrow was protected a little bit more. I thought he didn't play a great game throwing the ball, but they still won 27-15 and look kind of get back to their winning ways there in Cincinnati. And of course, we all heard about Tua Tagovailoa, who took a nasty hit from the Cincinnati defensive lineman and tackled him and kind of spun him around really fast. And he slammed his head against the turf, and he went into the fencing position where his fingers were all contorted. It was very scary to see. But, he's apparently was back in the sidelines. He flew back with the team last night, so we'll see moving forward. There's a lot of controversy about should he have played, because it looked like he suffered a concussion the week before as he was playing against Buffalo. He got up a little wobbly, kind of stumbled down a little bit, and then got back up and kept playing. Was cleared with the concussion. They said it was a back. I've had back issues where sometimes, that kind of jars you a little bit where you kind of wobble. So I can't really say if that was a concussion or not. But last night it definitely was. It definitely was. And Amazon Prime, which is who are now broadcasting the Thursday night games, I was hearing the Philadelphia Sports Radio saying they should have stopped showing the fencing position and the way Tua was laying on the ground. And I beg to differ. I beg to differ because you show it over and over and over again. It really starts to seep into the minds of people how violent football is, how violent American football is. I mean, these guys are crashing into walls all the time, and people put their livelihoods, their careers, their future in danger. You know, how many careers have been ended causing concussions? How many suicides have we seen from players in the 70s and the 80s that I grew up watching who had committed suicide because of the effects of the concussions they sustained while playing? The NFL has done a better job of being concussion aware, especially with practice habits, especially with the helmets that they use. But I don't blame Amazon for showing that video because I think, again, it brings it to the forefront of how violent this game is, and more safety measures have to be put into place. There's also talk about should Tua play next week, and that, you know, if Tua had a concussion and he didn't feel deemed ready to play, his agent has to step in there and say, you know what, he's not ready to play. I've had consultations with him or whatever, but maybe, you know, Tua's not going to want to come out. He's not going to miss a game. That's not how athletes are wired that way. They're just not wired to want to miss games. They'll do everything they want to be in there. So I'm not sure if we'll really know the full story of what happened between the Bills game and the game last night against the Bengals. But he was cleared. He was not in concussion protocol, and he also has to speak up. You know, it's not just, yeah, Miami has to protect them, protect their asset, but he's also got to protect himself and his livelihood and his future. And I'm sure he'll have a lot of conversations going into week 5 because Dolphins have almost like a mini bye with playing on Thursday night. It's the Matt Kwazaborski Show. It's exciting week, exciting time to be an Eagles fan. Coming out of week 1, everyone was ripping the defensive coordinator. Well, guess what? The defense has only given up 15 points in the last 2 games in the last 8 quarters. 15 points in 8 quarters. That's less than 2 points a quarter. And in Washington, in the case of their scores, it was a garbage time touchdown. Minnesota scored their points in the first half. When it looked like they could have stayed into the game, it was 21-7 at one point, and then that was it. The defense really shut them down. What I also noticed, too, is the energy that teams are playing with. Like, Detroit brought energy the entire game, and that's why that game was very helter-skelter, especially in the fourth quarter, making us a little bit nervous as Eagles fans. Minnesota I felt like they had no energy. You know, they got Justin Jefferson, the one play by Darius Slay where he sort of grabs his hand and wraps it around so the ref can't see. He's complaining. He was taken out of the game. Dalvin Cook never got uncooked. Dalvin Cook never got started burning. And Washington, they came out playing with energy, but everyone got seriously deflated by the amount of hits Carson was taking, as well as once the defense gave up a couple of scores, like the defense seemed to kind of sit back a little bit more. So, and that's not going to be the case this week. We have the Jacksonville Jaguars coming back into Philadelphia. Douglas Pederson, the head coach of Jacksonville, takes the sideline against the Eagles. And what is affectionately known as Dougie P Week. We call Coach Pederson Dougie P affectionately for his win of the Super Bowl. And reflecting on Doug Pederson as a person and a coach, and I think you're seeing this in Jacksonville now, he lets his players play. He lets his players be men, be accountable, be responsible, but he works them. He pushes them in the practice and in the weight rooms to be a better person all the time. Excuse me, but he doesn't take that Urban Meyer, like I am the whole face of the franchise and you're nothing kind of approach. He just lets players play, and they seem to really enjoy playing with him. I mean, they went into Los Angeles, the Chargers, and walloped them. The Jacksonville Jaguars just walloped the Chargers at home. And yeah, the Chargers were banged up offensively. They were banged up. Herbert, we know, that had his cracked cartilage. Keenan Allen was out, their best wide receiver. They lost a couple of offensive linemen. The running backs, Austin Eckler's not getting uncorked at all. But the defense gave up 38 points, and they're supposed to be a damn good defense, the Chargers. I know Joey Bosa went down with an injury, had to leave, but they've played without him before and played at a higher level. And to give up 38 points, man, that's a hell of a job coaching by Doug Pederson. A lot of the sentiment going into these new 17-game seasons, by the way, it's only the second one, is that the lack of preseason games is going to hurt preparations. Well, it's not hurting Jacksonville. It's not hurting the Eagles. It's not hurting Miami. It's not hurting Buffalo, even though they lost last week. You know, these teams look like they're ready to go and they're ready to play. And that's what you have is the two teams that are going to be ready to go, being coached up. I think Doug Pederson, the Jacksonville job was the best situation for him to come in and kind of get that franchise quarterback. He's got some talent at the running back position. He's got a defense that does fly around the field as well. His wide receivers, they went out and got Christian Kirk. They have another wide receiver, a little thin at the wide receiver. And that's I think the main difference between the Eagles and the Jaguars is the depth and the inexperience by the Jaguars. Like, they're going to get there, but I'll tell you what, the Jacksonville Jaguars are underdogs by 6.5. It might have gone down now because a couple key Eagles are out for the game. That being Avonte Maddox is ruled out with an ankle, and Boston Scott, we learned just before I started broadcast, he's out for the game. So that might bring the point spread a little bit down, especially the loss of Maddox. But the Eagles are going to have to score in the second half this week and able to win. I'm telling you, they're absolutely going to have to do it. It is a tough ask of the Jaguars to go coast to coast on road games 2 weeks in a row. They're not playing in Jacksonville. They're playing in Philadelphia. It's going to be stormy in Philly. I don't know when the rains will move out, before the game or during the game. Or maybe it'll pour the whole time on. We're just not really sure right now how that's going to look. So it's going to be a tough task for Jacksonville. However, they're going to bring it, and they're going to bring it every play. And you go back to Doug Pederson, and it was a strange time for him in Philadelphia. I think, first of all, I find him to be a completely humbling guy. Like I said, he just seems to let his players be themselves. He knows how to treat them one of the guy, but he also knows the fine line when he has to be the head coach, when to make head coaching decisions, i.e. when it comes to discipline and what goes behind the closed doors. I can say during his Eagles tenure, obviously there was tension with Carson Wentz and Jalen Hurts towards the end of Carson's time there, but you never really heard about things behind the scenes too much. I think one time Alshon Jeffrey made comments to a reporter about Carson Wentz, but other than that, it wasn't as soap opera as I remember it being under Andy Reid back in the day. But what I like about Pederson is just his humility. He first came to Philadelphia in 1999. He was going to be the starter on Andy Reid's team, but he also knew he was going to be, preparing to be really Donovan McNabb's. He was going to be the one that's going to start a few games until Donovan McNabb was ready to play and be a starter. I think Andy named Donovan to start like week 8 or week 9, and Pederson knew that. He was fine with that. He had won a Super Bowl as a backup to Brett Favre in Green Bay. He backed up Dan Marino, so he knew the quarterback position and how to play it how to coach it at a high level. And he was what he was as a player. He's a backup quarterback, but he just came in. I really did admire that about him. When he was around the league, he left the league for a little while and coached high school football in Louisiana. He was not too proud to take a head coaching high school job, and I think he realized that would help him prepare for the NFL. He goes back to Kansas City, becomes Andy's offensive coordinator, and he wasn't the first, second, third, or fourth choice by the Eagles to be the head coach either. He was like the fifth or sixth choice from what we hear through there. He still took the job. He went back to a city that he loved, and he brought the Andy Reid way, in his interpretation, back. Kind of like a stable moment for the most part after the debacle of Chip Kelly. And then we wins the Super Bowl. They get Carson Wentz in 2016. They muddle through that season, rebuilding it. And the next year they just take off and just, caught lightning in a bottle that whole year. I mean, it was just amazing year, coached by Doug Pederson. We're like, what is going on? And the Eagle offense was flying around, and we knew it was his offense. It wasn't the defense that was winning the games. They played obviously at a high level, Super Bowl winning level, and made stops and plays when they had to. But it was Pederson's offense that went in and just shook the world. And the one game I remember when I was living in Prague, they played the Denver Broncos. Denver came into Philly kind of with swagger. They had the number 1 ranked defense, or the top defense in the AFC at least. And they came into Lincoln Financial Field on a Sunday afternoon, which played to Denver's favor, and we just walloped them. 54 points we scored on them, and I was like, this team's going somewhere, Weren't really buying into the hype early on because we're Eagles fans. You really couldn't. But that was the game where I remember they played, how we had traded for Jay Ajayi, the running back from Miami, who was like, wow, they got Jay Ajayi. And he brought some depth and stability to the running back position. And, Carson was throwing dimes. You had Alshon Jeffrey, who was your deep threat. You had the other wide receiver who was the fast threat. I'm drawing a blank right now. He didn't make that many catches. You had Brett Selleck, Zach Ertz in there at the tight end position. You had LeGarrette Blount, We also talked about Corey Clement. We had a stud offensive line, there. And we even lost all-world left tackle Jason Peters for half the year, and Halaputu Vaitai of now the Detroit Lions manned up that left tackle position for, the rest of I think it was the final 8 games of the regular season and all of the playoffs. So it was an amazing job. Steve Wisniewski came in and played an amazing job at the left guard tackle. You had Barrett Brooks and Lane Johnson, Jason Kelsey, arguably the 3 best at their position that year. And the defense led by Malcolm Jenkins, Fletcher Cox, and Brandon Graham. It was a fun team to watch. And the credit goes to Doug Pederson. Absolutely. It's Matt Kwazaborski Show calling you. Trying to do a podcast about the Eagles, looking forward to Dougie P week, the recap of the Washington week, and then kind of looking around the league this week. And I also want to talk about some franchise-altering transactions, signing. I'm talking more about signings and trades than drafting. And a lot has been made, and I think Howie Roseman made one this year that we'll go in and talk about. But just the final thoughts on Doug Pederson. Really happy he's coming back to Philadelphia. And going back to his legacy in Philadelphia, he won the Super Bowl in the season 2017, so he won it in 2018, and he was out of a job, in less than 3 years. No Super Bowl winning coach had ever been fired so quickly by their teams before. I was doing some research on that. Only 10 Super Bowl winning coaches got fired, and the rest kind of just went out on their own terms. And I don't think there was a lot of tension between Carson, Wentz's camp, and his people, and then the coaching staff. And you could see in that 2020 year that Carson Wentz was not the same player. He looked like he was uncoachable. He was not engaging in his teammates on the sidelines. And one of my favorite pictures of Doug Pederson, Jalen Hurts, and Carson Wentz is, I think it's the first game where Jalen Hurts starts, the last 4 games of the season. He goes in against the Saints. He actually won the game. And there's a look with Pederson on the sideline looking at Wentz. Like, Wentz's head is sort of turned to the back of the camera, and Pederson's just giving him a look like, look, this kid is listening to what I'm doing. He's taking it in. He's performing. And, you got to listen to the coaches. And I think what happened after that season, it was clear that either Carson or Doug P had to go. Carson had signed that long-term contract. He was going into it, the $128 million contract. He was going to enter into that in the 2021 season. Eagles didn't make the playoffs. They were like 4-11. And Doug Pederson gets fired. It was a little bit shocking because it took a while, it seemed like, excuse me, for him to get fired. And they did it. And to me, and then they trade Carson. I want to say they traded Carson Wentz right before the draft. I think before the draft. I think sometime after the combine and the draft, he was traded in between those periods. And I just think with the hiring of Sirianni, I just think Lurie and Roseman and the powers that be just kind of wanted to move away from the Andy Reid generation. Doug P was a coach on Andy Reid's staff, was a player for Andy Reid. Then they were interviewing Eric Bieniemy, who still has not a head coaching job, is still the offensive coordinator in Kansas City. Mike Kafka, who was a Eagles backup quarterback / practice squad guy, who's now the offensive coordinator for the Giants, who also coached with Andy Reid. And I really think that's what it was. I think it was just, let's start over with a new generation, like not the Andy Reid era, but the generation. Let's not hire another Andy Reid protege. Let's just kind of move away from that and define our own future. And I think that was crucial for Howie Roseman. That was crucial for Jeffrey Lurie. It was crucial for Nick Sirianni, who's looking like the front runner for Coach of the Year right now. Amazing how far that guy has come speaking in the public. He was such a deer in the headlights his very first press conference, and rightfully so. He came to the Eagles from Indianapolis, where he was the wide receivers coach. Has a rich history of coaches in his family. His dad, his grandfather, his uncle, his brothers, they're all coaches on some level or have been. And so he knows how to coach and how to be a leader. And I really think he knows how to speak to this generation. And he's a super competitive guy. The mock on him also, too, is like, when he was interviewing draftees during the pandemic, they would play rock, paper, scissors to see how competitive they are on video because you couldn't have in-person visits, right? The vaccines weren't rolled out yet. And everyone's kind of mocking him. So he really plays this rock, paper, scissors like, you kind of were like, I don't know about this guy. But he seems to, get the troops rallied around him. They seem to love him. Oh, we also made the comment of that, right now we're like a seed planting the flower, and the flower is going to grow and the flower is going to bloom. And right now, the seeds are being watered or nurtured. And it's like, That's not really the right analogy for American football, but it worked. Ever since that, the team really took off, and he did a fantastic job coaching. He understands that his system may have not worked, so he turned the play calling over, his play calling ability, to Shane Steichen, who has this offense rolling right now. And Jonathan Gannon seems to be getting the players that he wants to get into the schemes that he wants, and the defense is clicking on all cylinders. I do think the Eagles will win, but I think it will be a little bit closer than than people think. It might be a 7-point game, but I do expect Jacksonville coming into Philly. Even though they were in Los Angeles last week, they're going to play with an extraordinary amount of energy. They're going to want to win for their coach coming back to Philadelphia, the place that fired him. And like I said, he was the quickest Super Bowl winning head coach ever to be fired after 3 seasons. So it's just, they're going to want to play. They're going to want to bring it. I just think the depth, the little experience, and the traveling might wear them down a little bit, Jacksonville. But I'm expecting a much competitive game, and I'm hoping to see the opening standing ovation for Doug Pederson. He better get a long standing ovation, as he's brought the only Super Bowl win to the Philadelphia Eagles franchise. And that's where we are going into this week. I think the Eagles will probably win like 31-24. I could see that. Maybe even 31-21. I still think they're going to be able to put some points on the board. I think you're going to see Jalen make some really key throws, but use his legs a little bit more, especially with the absence of Boston Scott. But I think, the Jaguars, I watch their defense. They fly around like Detroit. They really do, and they got a lot going for them. And don't forget, they shut out the Indianapolis Colts the week before, 24-0 at home for their second win of the season. They did lose in Washington in a competitive game. I think they lost 28-24, 28-22. So they've been in their games, or they've destroyed their opponents, or they've been in the one game they lost. They were not getting destroyed by Washington in that game at all. So I really do look forward to it. Dougie P coming back, and I also started thinking about major transactions. I'm talking about signings or free agent signings or trades around the Eagles that I think put this franchise to the next level in my lifetime. And I think I will start with John Runyan, who was the first free agent that the Eagles had signed back in 1999 under Andy Reid. John Runyan was a lineman for the Tennessee Titans who had just barely lost the Super Bowl to the Los Angeles Rams. If you don't remember, Kevin Dyson kind of diving and reaching the 2-yard line and just couldn't get that ball over the goal line. And I admired Runyan. I was like, sure, the Eagles have to pay these guys a lot to come here, but they still have salary cap to deal with. We were still playing in the last years of the vet. The NovaCare practice facility was not even created yet. And Runyan decided to come here, and he's anchored an offensive line that had Trey Thomas on the other side of it. And they sort of anchored those. They were the tackles during the Andy Reid era that you were just like, wow, these guys are legit. They're tough. They're strong. And they're potential future Hall of Famers, at least Eagle Hall of Famers. The next one I'd have to go is T.O. I think that's obvious what T.O. did during the Super Bowl year leading up to the 2004 season. The Eagles were criticized for not getting Donovan McNabb any weapons at the wide receiver position. Their drafting was horrible of James Thrash and Todd Pinkston. They just couldn't, Freddie Mitchell, they just couldn't seem to put it together. We talked about this on the show last week with John Mathers, who's not able to be with us this week. The day that we traded for T.O., and then we get Javon Curse all on the same day. And that day sort of really took this franchise to the next level. More so on T.O. If you remember the year, he played 10 regular season games, putting up crazy amount of numbers. I think he caught like 21 touchdowns in 10 games. Breaks his ankle on a horse collar tackle by Roy Williams of the Dallas Cowboys, which became a penalty after that because a horse collar is when you catch the receiver, the runner from behind under the neck area and pull them back by their pads, and that caused T.O.'s ankle to get jammed into the turf and twisted and broke it. He rehabs back miraculously, plays in the Super Bowl, makes 10 catches for like 129 yards or 122 yards. Would have gotten MVP if the Eagles won that game, but he really took this franchise. We could see what it could be on the next level, and I really think that transaction there was another altering one for this franchise. But then we all know what happened with T.O. after that. It was like a Greek tragedy. Started, holding out, doing the sit-ups in the driveway, calling Donovan McNabb, throwing up in the huddle in Jacksonville, like kind of just brought the franchise down a little bit after that. He was also traded for all-world left tackle Jason Peters back in 2008, who played a really long time for the Eagles at a very, very all-pro high level. They got him from the Buffalo Bills for a bunch of draft picks. He was going to hold out. And Peters is an amazing story, too, because he He played tight end in college, and they transitioned him, the Bills did, to left tackle, and was just a stalwart for the Eagles for a long time. He did not get along with Chip Kelly. I love the fact that he kind of refused to go in the game sometimes when Chip wanted to put him in the game. He battled a lot of nagging injuries. He tore both Achilles, and when he came back, he still played at an extremely, extremely high level. He played for the Bears last year, and now he's with the Dallas Cowboys, which I think is his hometown team growing up. And, Eagles fans are like, oh, it sucks that he's playing there. I'm like, good for him. Good for him. He gets to play for his hometown team. I mean, how many of you would do that? Of course you play for the Eagles, but not all the Eagles players aren't from Philadelphia. So, unless you're Hassan Reddick. So I really think it's great for him if he has a chance to go in and make a difference at the high level. He should still do it. And it goes to Tom Brady. He still thinks he can play at a high level. Do it, because once you know it's done forever for these guys. So why not go in and play that way? The next one I'd have to say is Malcolm Jenkins, the safety. The Eagles had a big gap in the hole from safety between Brian Dawkins to about Malcolm Jenkins' time when he signed, and Jenkins was a Saint, helped the Saints win the Super Bowl back in 2009, 2010. They won it one year. I think they won it in the year 2010. Was a leader. He comes here. He locks down the free safety position. He plays almost every snap of his career, his Eagles career. I think he played almost every single snap, or something like 95% of them. Was the leader of the secondary, and helped us win a Super Bowl. And he was a huge leader, has huge effect in the community. He lived in my neighborhood that I grew up in Fishtown when he lived in Philadelphia. Not sure if he still has a house there, which I think is awesome. And he was kind of put the franchise next level, kind of got that secondary to a point where he had a playmaker back there, and you could start building around him if that you wanted to. And then the next one I'd have to say is A.J. Brown. Through 3 games, I'm ready to say that the draft day trade for A.J. Brown has taken this franchise to the next level. In terms of okay, we're 3-0. We have a favorable schedule going the way, but injuries can happen. We saw 2 injuries. We lost 2 key players already for this weekend. A.J. Brown has the same effect that T.O., I think, had, and maybe Alshon Jeffrey, in the fact that you're getting a stud wide receiver that just makes everyone around him better. He is a beast out there. He just, he catches, his hands are so soft and yet he's so strong. It's hard to break up a pass for him. Then it's very hard to tackle him when he turns on the jets. I mean, he's letting Devonta Smith be there on the other side on the 2 receiver, who's had 2 really good games, even though I was questioning Devonta after week 1 where he had nothing. But I also think it looked like they were trying to get A.J. Brown just involved in the offense. It's going to open up the games for Quez Watkins. It's going to open up the game for Dallas Goedert. Just having a guy you always have to pay attention to, and both wide receivers. Teams have to scheme. Devonta and A.J. Brown, you can no longer just pay attention to one. Last year was more or less, let's pay more attention to Devonta Smith, because we have Rager and Quez Watkins, who was getting his feet left, John Hightower. They really had nothing at that wide receiver 2 position last year. So I think this is one that puts this offense to the next level. He's got a tremendous comfortability level, friendship-wise, with Jalen Hurts. And I think that is really helping them develop chemistry almost immediately in the whole offense. And they seem to really, really enjoy playing with each other. And they're 3-0, the only undefeated team in the league right now, after Miami loses last night. So, going into this weekend, I think there's some key games in the conferences that could set teams apart. Vikings and the Saints are playing in London game this week. Saints are without Jameis Winston, and they're without Michael Thomas. Or Winston is listed doubtful, the quarterback. So I think the Vikings look like they should be able to take that. The Browns going to Atlanta, and Atlanta's 1-2, but they've been in all 3 games. In those last 2 games, they won last week. The week before that against the Rams, they only lost by 4, and they should have beat the Saints opening day. They're winning the entire game and then lose at the last second. But they went on the road last week and won the game. I want to forget who they played last week. Click. Yeah, now the internet wants to be a little slow. Anyway, so they're going to play the Bills go into Baltimore, which I think will set the huge conference rival early in the season. The Bills coming off a very frustrating loss in Miami last week where it was 98 degrees. And if you know in the NFL, the home team chooses what jerseys will be worn. So, for example, Usually when everyone plays in Miami, Miami will wear their whites and they'll make the teams wear their color jerseys. You see it all the time, and the Bills were playing in their color jerseys and just couldn't get anything really going. Josh Allen still threw for 400 yards, but he put the ball up 63 times. It's just one of those frustrating losses, but it's a very, very good win for the Miami Dolphins because, they didn't have to go neck to neck offensively. They only scored 21 points, and the Bills only scored 19. The Ravens, I'm not high on the Ravens at all. I'm just not a huge fan of Lamar Jackson, even though he's got statistically the best quarterback right now. I don't know. We'll see how that goes. It's going to be a very close game. It's going to be another big challenge for the Bills on the road. Washington goes into Dallas, watching Dallas Monday night against the Giants. I think both teams now, those two teams, I'm talking about New York, came down to earth a little bit, and Dallas kind of ran a pretty solid coach game, and they got a player in Cooper Rush. Everyone's saying, can't wait till Dak gets back, but Cooper Rush can throw the ball. He plays with a high level of confidence, and he has some tight spirals there and hits the guys on the mark. CeeDee Lamb dropped a wide-open touchdown pass, but then made up for it. They're using Zeke and Pollard very well. They're getting their tight ends involved a little bit more, and they still have Michael Gallup coming back from the IR eventually. I don't see Washington, and their defense is playing extremely well. They have Dan Quinn, the former Atlanta Falcons coach, as the defensive coordinator, who is extremely successful in Seattle with the Legion of Boom. I think he has got that pass rush rounded into form, and I think Washington's in for another long day. The 1-2 Seahawks visit the 1-2 Lions. You hope the Lions will win because I want to see them be competitive, but you just don't know. You don't know with that coaching staff if it's a close game. I think Seattle's going to be tough coming on the road into Detroit, and if Detroit's still playing at a high level on the defensive line, could be going Detroit's way there. The Chargers go into the Texans. Chargers are banged up, and Houston's 0-2-1, but they've been in every game. They should have beaten Denver, they should have beaten Chicago, and they should have beaten the Colts. They didn't, but they were in the games. And widely, people are thinking they're the worst team in football this year. But I think they're better than their 0-2-1 records. And I think the Chargers better come into that game prepared and focused. They won't. Houston doesn't have much offensively, but they do have a really good defense. And if they're able to hurt Herbert again, that could be an issue. Their offensive line, the Chargers, are banged up, missing some key pieces, and they're missing their top wide receiver in Keenan Allen. So that could be a big game. Bears at the Giants. I don't know. I mean, Bears are 2-1 somehow. Giants are 2-1. It's in New York. You go with New York. Jaguars, the Eagles. Like I said, Jaguars 2-1. They're going to bring the energy. The Eagles are going to have to score in the second half, and I think they will, and I think they'll win this game. Anywhere between the 6 to 10 point level. I just don't think Jacksonville is as deep as the Eagles, and they're inexperienced. And they come in, and the Eagles have always historically handled inexperienced quarterbacks very, very well. But they're going to bring the energy. They got weapons. They have talent in Jacksonville, and I think they're going to be a team to watch for, and probably should win that division. 1-2 Jets at the Steelers. Steelers, the Mitchell Trubisky era is looking not very good offensively. So there's the Jets. They might get Zach Wilson back. Let's see what the Jets. We'll see what the Jets bring if they're able to bring the energy they brought into Cleveland to Pittsburgh. This week, we'll see. Cardinals are at the Panthers, another horrible game. Patriots at Packers. I mean, with Mac Jones probably being out, Green Bay, I think, is slowly rounding into form. That was a huge win in Tampa Bay last week where they only won 16-14. But their defense came to play. And, they won the game, and they usually do not win in the heat. Broncos are at the Raiders. I mean, what's going on with Russell Wilson? They won 11-10, 16-9. My kicker is scoring more points in fantasy than my starting quarterback. The Raiders are 0-3. I'm very surprised at that. I know they lost to the bad loss to the Cardinals. They lost to the Chargers. Bad loss to the Cardinals, and they lost last week as well. So we'll see. I'm a little shocked that they're 0-3. They lost to the Titans. The Titans kind of needed that win. Chiefs Sunday night game. Chiefs at Bucks. Rematch of the Super Bowl from 2 years ago, and then the Rams at the 49ers. Yeah, I don't know. The Chiefs lost a bad game against a bad Indianapolis Colts team, but the Bucs are just banged up on offense. We'll see if the Chiefs can go into Tampa and make some noise. The Rams at the 49ers. Rams might be shaping into form there. Jimmy G didn't score a lot of points last week. They only scored 10 points on the road in Denver. I know that's it's a hard place to play, but they should have won that game for as bad as Denver's playing offensively. So it's been the Matt Kwazaborski Show. Kind of quick look around the league this year, and around the league so far this week. Sorry, I'm a little disjointed. I apologize. Just wanted to go and see what the Eagles had done. What I thought were great points coming out of the Washington win. It was an utter domination on all sides of the ball. Like I said, I gave my top points to both the defense and Devonta Smith. I got Jalen Hurts coming in at number 2 there. Number 3 is the coaching staff. They're all ready to play on all facets of the game. Things to work on. They got to do better in the punt protection. Brett Covey almost got his head knocked off twice. And the running game needs to get untracked a little bit. It will. They didn't really need it last week. I thought Sanders had a couple key runs, but wasn't overly dominating if you're going to pick on something. And like we said, they're the only undefeated team. They got Doug Pederson coming back, Super Bowl winning head coach Doug Pederson, former Eagles quarterback. I'm looking really forward to the reception that he gets. And he's one of my favorite people, not just, favorite coaches, but one of the favorite people. Like, he just lets his guys play, treats them like men, holds them accountable and responsible. And behind closed doors, he takes care of a lot of the drama. You didn't see a lot of drama sneaking out of Philadelphia during his time. Yes, the Carson thing got a little bit strange, but also the press has to drum up stories for that. And like I said, I think he lost his job because I really do think that Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman just wanted to move on from the Andy Reid generation. I think that's why Matt Kafka wasn't hired, or Eric Bieniemy, and they hired Nick Sirianni. I'm not going to go down the route because, Frank Reich, Doug Pederson. No, it's different. Reich has coached under different head coaches before, especially like Ken Wisenhunt. So he wasn't groomed by Andy Reid or Doug Pederson, that's for sure. But I do think that they just wanted to move on, and it was the right move. Everyone loves Sirianni, it seems like. He can say some interesting things for time. His first press conference was deer in the headlights. Playing rock, paper, scissors during COVID. It was actually more brilliant than you realize. And then the whole, we're seeds and we're watering the seeds and nurturing the flowers comment that came out, that the team really gelled when he said that. The reporters were mocking him like that's really not what you say in American football, but hey, it's worked. So I do expect them to win. Also, look at the top transactions that I think jettison this franchise to the next level. Drafting Donovan McNabb is a franchise-altering move. Carson Wentz, drafting him is that franchise-altering. Jalen Hurts, franchise-altering. But there's some key signings and trades that the Eagles made from 1999 to now, last 23 years. I think John Runyan signing the right tackle from Tennessee in Andy Reid's first year was a huge move for the offensive line. Trading for T.O., that was a magical season, even though it was more of a Greek tragedy, as it sort of was like the pinnacle of the Eagles. And also remember the day that we acquired T.O., we also signed Javon Curse, who was supposed to be a difference maker on the defensive line. Didn't quite pan out that way, but he had some really, really positive impact. I think then you look at the trade for Jason Peters from Buffalo, solidifying the left tackle spot after Trey Thomas. His playing days were over. Signing of Malcolm Jenkins, the safety position. And then I think the trade for A.J. Brown is going to be right up there when the story is all said and done. It's been the Matt Kwazaborski Show, calling you from Washington, D.C. I really appreciate all of you that will download this and tune in. I really love my loyal listeners. And remember to inspire the inspiration. Do not wait for the inspiration to inspire you. Have a wonderful week, everyone.